Hello, this is Robert Rickover. I'm an Alexander Technique teacher in Lincoln, Nebraska. I teach in Toronto, and these days I teach pretty much exclusively online. My guest today is Imogen Ragone, an Alexander Technique teacher in Wilmington, Delaware, a city with newfound fame. We're talking early 2021, and she also teaches online. And Imogen does not know what we're going to be talking about. I like to surprise her.
Yes.
But I want to discuss a type of Alexander Technique direction, a very specific type sometimes called paradoxical directions. You would use that term also,
I
right?
know what you're talking about, yes.
So they're a subset, you might say, of negative directions, which were a huge improvement over what existed before. But most of them, I would say, have been superseded by freedom directions, which are more efficient and shorter and cleaner. But there's still some that have their own power, their own unique power. And I would say, and let me give you examples of a negative direction might be, I'm not tensing my neck, or I'm not compressing myself. So negative statements about what I'm not doing, sometimes these are called inhibitory directions. And this is a bit of jargon that if the word doesn't mean anything to you, don't worry about, but Alexander teachers will sort of have some idea.
It's like you're being very clear about what you don't want.
You're saying no to certain things.
Yeah.
And they are very powerful directions. I've used them for years, but generally it's a lot easier to teach with freedom direction. So the freedom direction correlates of those negative ones would be my neck is free or I'm free. But there's a certain class of negative directions that are a little different, these paradoxical ones. And I'd like to illustrate one with you being now this is not a true test of them because Imogen has been using these, I think, pretty regularly.
Yeah, I've used them before, yes.
Use them in your teaching, I'm sure. So, but if you wouldn't mind standing up and maybe going towards the back of the room, and what I'm going to do is tell Imogen the direction to use, and she's going to use it in walking. So she'll walk probably in a circle would be the easiest. And then from time to time, she'll shift from using the direction, which I'm going to give her, to a nonsense direction. I'm purple or I'm green, a direction that has no impact on her walking. So she can get a nice contrast. She has wooden floors, so she may be able to hear a difference.
I'm sorry, I'm only in my socks.
Yeah,
but,
and with a new student, I might suggest they put on some hard-soled shoes, but we don't really need that for this. So the thought is, since you're going to be walking in a moment, the thought is, I'm not walking. Which you will take into walking and then occasionally shift back and forth a couple of times to I'm green or I'm purple. Good. So I assume you noticed the difference.
I did notice the difference.
Why don't you sit down and we'll talk about the difference and why I think this is such an important little topic for Alexander students and teachers. So I assume that when you thought I'm not walking, your walking got a little easier.
Well, I sort of started off with it, so I didn't have a comparison. But when I went to I'm green, I basically noticed a less freedom and ease in my walking. And when I went back to I'm not walking, which of course is paradoxical because I was walking, things freed up a bit more.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if you could see it. I wasn't
Yeah,
saying
I don't,
different
I
things.
think this is something that people could experiment on their own. But walking is a good activity, but any activity would be useful. Again, as with all Alexander directions, uh, the major component of them that determines their effectiveness is how they are used, not so much just what they are. So when you think I'm not walking, the idea here is you don't do anything about that thought.
Yeah, I'm not trying to implement anything. It's just
Right.
this thought,
You're getting,
very
you're
likely, that
getting
I'm just.
across the room using your feet and legs to propel you.
Mhm.
And you're just not labeling it walking. You're labeling it something else other than walking. Although,
I think of it as, it's kind of like, because I'm saying I'm not walking to myself effectively while I'm walking around, it gives my, I don't know, I might not be using the right term, subconscious
yeah,
brain
right,
power a chance to just find its own way that's not my habitual way, that's
right,
my, so, and that
exactly,
would typically be a more efficient way than my
right,
habitual way.
right. And
Seems to work that way.
just
Yeah.
before I get into why I think this is such an important direction, um, apart from the fact that most students can pick up on this pretty quickly. My grandkid, who 6 years old, who's expressed an interest in having lessons. And I tried various stratagems, and the one he latched onto immediately was the I'm not doing whatever I'm doing one. So playing back then it was
Actually, a 6-year-old might take to I'm not.
basketball. Yeah. And his mother even overheard him telling his younger brother, well, that the secret is you just say you're not doing what you're doing. That's the trick. And his brother didn't quite get it. So but it is something that most students can pick up on pretty quickly. Um, but before I explain why I think this is such an important thing, is that if you think about, let's say you were in an urban situation and you're out on the sidewalk and you see a lot of people around you walking. When I go up to Toronto, all I have to do is walk out the front door of the building I'm staying in. There are dozens of people walking back and forth in and out. Each one of them, if you were to ask them what they were doing, they would say, hey, I'm walking to work or I'm walking to the coffee shop or whatever. They're all in their own minds walking. But if you look carefully, you'll see they're all walking a little differently. There's a commonality, as you know, the legs are moving them forward, but there are huge differences in what they're doing. So the word walk is very, you might say, subjective, right? My idea of taking a walk might end up looking significantly different than your idea of taking a walk. Now, some of it's just different body sizes and shapes, but a lot of it is just habits of walking. And here's my take on it, pretty much what you just said. Um, when you say to yourself, I'm not walking, I think that's shorthand for a longer statement that's kind of too long to be a nice direction. Uh, I'm not walking, comma, body, mind, figure out a different way. Just different, not the same. I'm not walking the way what I want is not to walk the way I usually do, some other way. And your body mind springs into action. You might say all the stuff behind your prefrontal cortex, your nervous system, muscles, ligaments, all that stuff rearranges itself pretty much instantly when you say that. It's happy to hear it, actually. And but you might think, well, if you ask it to come up with something different, logically, half the time it should be coming up with something worse. Right? Yeah.
Not been my experience
No,
though.
no. And not only has it been your experience, but I don't think it's ever been anybody's experience. And that is an amazing fact, that if you deliver that message, I'm not walking the way I usually do, figure something else out. It never says, oh, okay, give you a little limp if, it doesn't do that. It always takes you in a direction of greater ease. And that is an incredibly powerful fact to contemplate, because what it suggests is that all that unconscious part of you is strongly biased towards greater ease, less extra tension, less pounding your feet down on the ground in case of walking. Its orientation is to go in that direction.
Yeah.
But the curious fact about human beings is that it doesn't just necessarily do it on its own. It needs some mental intervention on your part. You have to give it an instruction.
I
It's not
think this is
automatically self-correcting for harmful habits that have been built up.
absolute, yeah. I'm thinking, and maybe you're guessing to this, but in the interview we just did about breathing, we were talking about getting out of our own way, and basically these directions help us get out of the way
Right,
that's all the inefficiencies about how we're walking,
exactly.
and not by micromanaging how we walk, but by leaving it to this subconscious part of us to do
But
its thing.
yeah, and if
But we have to consciously
you
give that.
you got to set it in motion. It doesn't do it on its own typically. And that is, but once you do, if you deliver a useful message in general with Alexander directions, if you deliver a message that is designed, is well thought out to be a good thing. So a direction like I'm free, or my neck is free, those kinds of directions, they're pretty good directions. Your body just says, oh, okay, I know how to do that. It doesn't mean I'm going to get perfect just by saying that. But whatever level of improvement is possible right now, this second, your body's going to come up with that. But it's not going to come up with that unless you ask for it, at least not
Right.
everybody. So,
I'm just thinking, and I think this might be useful for people to know, is that um, when you practice these types of directions, this type of thinking over time, and you get more and more experiences, for example, of walking in this freer, more efficient way, that will impact how you walk when you're not consciously
that's correct.
delivering the directions.
Right.
And absolutely. And when you do deliver the directions, you can still get a little bit more freedom and ease and efficiency, as I did just then. I've got loads of experience, and still there's something in our habits that we just do a bit more than we need to do in our
Sure.
excess tension in various forms. So
Absolutely. It changes the non-directed pattern, improves it. And
yeah.
in theory, at least, at some point, you may be, say, walking as efficiently as your physical mechanism structure right this second allows. And if you say, I'm not walking, then nothing will happen. It will just continue on. That's rare in the real world.
Hmm.
Alexander, I think, kind of indirectly addressed that whole question. What happens when you're perfect? Will you still be directing? We don't want to go into that now, but He said maybe you would, and he had some
But
reason.
it's a pretty unlikely
Getting
scenario
really off
anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a little off topic, but to me, the key element, two key elements is one, you got to take some mental action. You got to be interested. You got to actually take the trouble to think a useful thought very lightly. And I don't want to go into all the details of how you use directions, but I will put a link to some material on that. So that's one thing. And the second is you're dealing with a system yourself that is biased towards greater ease, greater comfort, less strain, and it's just waiting to hear from you. It's there. It's waiting to hear from you. You could use a simple analogy I'll sometimes use with students is a light switch in a room. I got light switches. You can't see them over here. So right now, yeah, all have light switches. So right now they're on, but let's say they were off just for a moment. They were turned off, and you wanted to get more light, the analogy to more ease. You'd have to turn the switch on, and that could be done with your fingers, or you could wire up some electrodes and you just think on, off, and on would bring the light about and off would stop it. The idea here is that even when the switch is turned off, the whole system is waiting for you to turn it on. It's not going to just go crashing in on its own. It needs you to make a decision. There's a gigantic system underlying what happens when you turn the switch on. It's not just the wiring in your house and the light bulbs and the filaments and all that. It's the grid system, the generators, the power transmission, all the regulation of that, keeping the right settings so that voltage doesn't get too high, too low, cycles are just right. It's a huge, gigantic system, and it's capable of springing into action for you, but you have to ask for it. Yeah, that's
clicking
it.
the switch. Yeah.
You have any other thoughts on this? To me, it just seems like an incredible thing that we're just waiting to be better, and the only thing that's stopping us is we haven't figured out how to communicate with ourselves in a very simple way and just say, oh, I'd like it to be better, but it has to be delivered in a certain way that makes sense to your body. So it has to be very soft. You have to not want to make it happen. You have to not attempt to make anything happen.
I'm thinking about this idea of just waiting to be asked.
Yeah.
And what I'm thinking is that the vast majority, if not all people, as they grow up and get older, have been actually sending a lot of messages to their body, but they've been the opposite.
Oh, quite.
So we're very practiced at, and that's why we've got the tensions in our walk, for instance, because over time, unconsciously, there've been a lot of other messages that we've unintentionally taken into how we walk, which could be, I've got to get there quickly, or all sorts of things. Where was I going with that?
I'm collapsing because gravity's pulling me down.
Yeah, we can have all sorts of false.
So incorrect an understanding of gravity, it's almost impossible to overemphasize how incorrect that is. But yeah, we are real good at negative thoughts, many of us.
Yeah, I mean, if you think every thought we have has a physical expression in some way, we kind of tend to think of them as separate, and they're not. Our thoughts are not separate from us, and most of the time we're not aware of what we're really thinking, or it's completely below consciousness. Right. And most of the time what we're thinking is not helping us get out of our own way to come back to that idea. And so consciously delivering just these little thoughts that just giving our body's permission to let go and do its own thing and find the better way. And yeah.
And, just from a teaching perspective, say you have a student who's caught up in a lot of negative thinking. So if you say, well, here's a direction, I'm free, that might, doesn't seem realistic, less maybe not too interested in trying it. But if you say, oh, here's one that seems so, it's just weird, but it doesn't go against your negativity directly. I'm not doing whatever I'm doing, walking, speaking, breathing, whatever. That's something that very few people are not able to do, to put out that thought. You have to sometimes help students through, especially with breathing. I mean, breathing is a very tricky one because some students might have some really terrible experiences connected with holding their breath. And so they might think, oh, this means holding your breath, and then they'll go into a panic mode or something. So breathing is a trickier one to use. The walking's nice and neutral for most people, climbing stairs, chopping a vegetable. And you just say, well, I'm not doing it, but I'm still going through the motions. And
yeah, I think it can be, I find it helpful to actually get people walking even first.
yeah.
And then as they're continuing to walk, I'm not walking,
Mm-hmm.
rather than I'm not walking to start off, seems like the opposite of what you're telling.
Right. You could go either way. I mean,
anyway, I found that sometimes to
but
be helpful.
what's nice about walking is you have some built-in feedback mechanisms that'll tell you whether that direction is actually useful. For one thing, you might just hear louder sounds from your feet arriving at the floor when you return to your old habit. That's a pretty good indication that your footfalls are heavier than it's possible for them to be. And
right.
if your footfalls are heavier and it's a result of some thinking up here, and there's no cable going from here down to your feet, it's got to have affected everything in you. I mean, there's no way around that. So I just think that paradoxical directions are like very hopeful. I mean, it's a nice thing to know that the universe is a friendly place, but it does require you to take some little interest in it. Yeah. That's all I got.
Very interesting as always, Robert.
Well,
thank you.
My guest today has been Imogen Ragone, an Alexander Technique teacher in Wilmington, Delaware. Thank you.